No one ever really expects to get shot down. Bang, and the whole aircraft is shunted across the desert floor.
I didn't feel that he was dead.
Well, what I'll do is I'll shoot you, and then I'll shoot myself.
Open the door. All I remember seeing is the station commander's car. That's never good news.
We were kept in solitary confinement for minutes, for hours, for days.
They want to essentially break down our will to live.
I mean, there was a gun right against my head. What would you do? Brought up in a traditional family in a town called Petersfield on the south coast. I've never been really bad at anything, but I've never been really good at anything. But I wanted an exciting life, and I can never remember ever wanting to be anything other than a fighter pilot. So few people could do it, and I wanted to be one of those people. I applied for a flying scholarship, and I got my private pilot's license at 17. I didn't learn to drive until I was 20. And then applied for a university cadetship in the Air Force.
We actually met on the very second day of our first term at Manchester University.
She had a confidence, pizzazz about her.
John and I basically, from pretty much the end of the first term, became, you know, an item. I do think he seemed to drop into conversation something about being a pilot.
Anybody can learn to fly, but to learn to fly in the limited time you're given to get to the level to be able to fly a fighter plane requires a learning capacity and a commitment to want to do it. That is hard. It's like having a driving test every day of your life. And it is an exciting world.
I also seem to remember him saying he wanted something like 10 children, which was probably less of a turn-on, if I'm honest. Once he finished in summer of '83, he went straight to the RAF and started on his first courses at RAF Cranwell. When he graduated, we got engaged. And then we ultimately got married in 1985 when he'd finished basic flying training.
It was from that moment we've never been apart. So we've been together, what, 45 years now?
A lot of your school friends are now scattered all over the country. It was actually really quite exciting having that connection with John, where we meet up with him at Cranwell. He'd got a great group of friends. Their girlfriends would all come along at the weekends. There'd be parties. There'd be, you know, the summer ball, the Christmas draw, lots of dressing up and, you know, buying posh frocks and all that, which, you know, I loved. It was almost like you were extending that sort of relatively carefree lifestyle from your school days, from your university days, and it was all good fun. So I was sad to leave there and be posted to Germany. By then, we had our son, Guy. Guy had been born in October '88, and we moved over to Germany in late summer of 1989. It was also all quite new to John because this was him actually arriving on a frontline squadron, which was what his ambition had always been, to be a fast jet pilot. Quite long days, early starts, you know, 6 a.m. met briefs and all that.
Flying high-speed aircraft, it kills people. So within the first 18 months of me leaving flying training, 12 people I know got killed.
A really good friend of ours, Andy Mannheim, we'd been at his and Vicky's wedding in the February, and by the June, we were at his funeral. We hadn't even received their wedding photos by the time we were saying goodbye to Andy. So that is something that not that many younger people are dealing with regularly. When you lose somebody when they're still so young, you know, you're talking 24, 25. It is strange, and it's a slightly strange environment where you're looking at everybody around you and almost sort of going, oh, who's going to be next?
So I was flying in northern Germany, doing my normal everyday job out of RAF Larbrook, when suddenly at the international distress frequency, we got kayak formation return to base, and I thought that was shocking because that was the recall for nuclear Armageddon at the time. So we flew back, put the jets on the ground, wandered in the squadron, and everyone's running around madly, putting kit out of the cupboards, pulling maps out of the drawer. The flight commander says, come in the office, and stood there, says, Kuwait's been invaded. Where the bloody hell is Kuwait? And he said, right, we've got to air-to-air refuel, we've got to go to war. We spent the next 2-3 months in Germany and all around UK practicing to go to war. Before we go to war, crews are teamed up. So John and I were crewed up together as pilot and navigator. We were probably the most junior on the squadron at that time. I met John Nichol at the Air Navigation School. John is an extremely exuberant, witty, larger-than-life character. More portly than I am, let's say. I'm more the grey man, I suppose. He's the guy who makes a party happen. You pair people who have the same experience but also get on well together. We were told the last time the Royal Air Force operated in the Gulf was in the 1920s, and then the Bedouins said, if ever we catch an Air Force pilot, we'll cut their balls off and sew them up into their mouth.
I'd been around with John Nichol and my John when they'd had a conversation in the bar.
And he went, you know, hey, JP, we're a crew. And I went, yeah, we're a great crew. And he says, I don't want to get captured. And I went, you know, I don't want to die that way. And he said, yeah, but we're a team. And I said, yeah, we're a good team, but I don't want to get captured. And I said, look, yeah, we're a great team. No, I don't want to get captured. What point are you trying to make? And he said, well, what if we got shot down and captured? What if they got us mixed up?
John Nichol also made it very clear he didn't particularly want them to get mixed up so that they got each other's in the wrong mouth.
I then said, well, if it looks like that's going to happen, what I'll do is I'll shoot you, and then I'll shoot myself. And he turned to me and he went, no, mate, I'll shoot you. And this was just a joke in the bar. And the squadron went out to Kuwait. The war started on the 16th of January. You don't take your wives to war. All the families remained in RAF Germany. We arrived at midnight, and the crews from the very first missions were coming back in, and they were just, you could see the adrenaline. They'd just been to war. They'd, you know, for the very first time got shot at, and we were expecting to plan to go and do the mission the following day. But we got called in, you're going to take off at 6 o'clock in the morning. And we argued, because the whole plan was there was never going to be a day low-level sortie by a tornado against an airfield. The risk was deemed too high. We argued for 3 hours, but we lost our argument. And I suppose if you can't take a joke, you shouldn't join the military. So we took off at 6:30 in the morning. We were going to attack an airfield to the southeast of Baghdad. When I say low level, we're flying at 50 feet above the ground. So you go from a bird's eye view of the world, looking down at the map. Suddenly, once you drop down, the horizon is up around your ears. You're flying your bum along the ground. You can feel the aggression of the sand and the rock as you're pushing on towards target. At about 100 miles out or so from the target, you plug the burners in, you push the speed up to 600, 700 miles an hour. And we were going to slingshot the bombs. It's called a loft attack.
Essentially, you're always going to fly at low level because that's the best way of getting in somewhere without being detected. So a loft attack is essentially about pulling up, and then you can loft the weapons into the target, which means that you don't have to overfly the target. So it allows you to come in at low level, sort of shoot your bombs, and then hopefully get out of the way before anyone catches you or sees you.
The moment I started to pull up, the whole head-up display just dumped. It just dropped off. And I'm going up and up and up, and everyone's shooting. I've got anti-aircraft guns. We've been shot at the whole way in. They look like ribbons in the sky coming towards you. You've got plumes of missiles. Basically, the whole world is like this. My head-up display is dumped. I'm going up, and you're extremely vulnerable. You're right in the heart of the missile zones. And you go, I've got to recover, so you roll upside down. It is actually quite a dangerous procedure. People kill themselves in it, and I had 8 tons of bombs on board. And as you can imagine, I was just swearing because you feel an innate failure when this happens. So we're flying away back home from the target. I hit the red button and we dumped the bombs dud in the desert. We then flew for a couple more minutes and then suddenly you get this huge kabang and the whole aircraft is shunted across the desert floor. I look down and you get this wow, 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 wow. My right-hand engine was on fire. Basically, a missile had gone right up our right-hand engine and exploded. And it also taken my flyable wire system out, so I'm flying off just a metal rod on the tailplane. The bullets, they hit my right-hand wing, they hit my sidewinder missile, so the sidewinder is only 4 feet from me on the right-hand side. It ignited the rocket propellant in the sidewinder missile, and a 4-meter torture flame shot out the front of the wing. By which time I was completely tunnel vision, trying desperately to keep this aircraft above the ground when John starts screaming, "We're on fire, we're on fire." And I said, "I know we're on fire." And he said, "No, look back, look back." And all I remember was orange. So we made a number of checks, pulled the aircraft up into a climb, 3, 2, 1, eject, eject, eject. And we both pulled the handle at the same time. And we ejected at 320 feet. And it's suddenly as if a massive giant grabs you by the shoulders and yanks you out the cockpit. You get this, and you get the shock of the parachute opening.
So in theory, even if you were at ground level, you could still eject safely. There are some caveats. If you had a very high angle of bank, then obviously you would go out like this. If you were upside down, you would go into the ground. So the drill, if you know you're going to eject, is to try and get as much height as you can because it's going to buy you time, and also to make sure that you're straight and level. So that is how we increase our chances of survival if we have to eject.
You open your eyes, we're very close to the ground. Suddenly, next thing, I mean, I was in my parachute for 10 seconds, 10, 15 seconds. And you just land like a sack of potatoes. And that's when the problems began. I'm sat down a bit dazed from the ejection. John Nichol landed about 100 meters away from me. He picked up his parachute, wandered across, stood above me and holding his parachute went, "Well, this'll be the Iraqi desert." And we just sat down and giggled. And the experts say you're meant to evade the enemy. You know, you're meant to hide your kit. Where? I was trained in Wales, you know. You start slashing the orange, you start burying the kit. We make a plan and we started to walk. We walked for about 2 hours and then a dumper truck arrived. About 15 soldiers got out with Kalashnikov machine guns. We're just lying on the floor. I mean, it's completely flat. At about 80 meters from us, they saw us. And you're thinking, you can't stand up, you can't do anything. You know, John did say, shall we stand up and accept we're going to get split open? And I said, no, there's always hope. Why do their job for them?
If you know you're about to be captured by the enemy, your priority would be to try and get a message to say, I'm about to be captured. Because there's also a chance, if they find your radio, they might ask you to start, sending signals and essentially trying to do kind of dummy messages to try and trick forces into sending sort of boots on the ground. And we have code words that we can use to indicate that we're under duress. And if you're under duress, then we know not to trust the information that is coming from us because, we're in the company of the enemy.
I wore contact lenses when I flew, and I took my contact lens out as I saw the soldiers, and it was on the sand here, and I put my glasses on, and the very first bullet blew my contact lens, and then you just get hundreds of bullets just bouncing all around your head, burying us in machine gun fire. I don't know how they missed. They eventually got to us, beat us up a bit, put us in a van, and we were taken off to Baghdad.
So you were really just sort of waiting and picking up bits of news on the telly, etc. I went to a gym class, kids went into a little creche that they held there, went on my bicycle, got home. I'd literally only walked in the door, I don't know, 10 minutes, and the phone rang. And it was Maggie Broadbent, who is the wife of John's CO. And Maggie said, oh, Helen, I've been trying to get hold of you. I need to pop round to see you. OK, fair enough, come on down. I do remember my heart beginning to beat a little bit, and I'm thinking, ooh, that's unusual. Maggie usually went everywhere on her bicycle as well. So I thought, right, so if I open the door and she's on her bike, then that will be fairly normal. If she's not on her bike, that might be different. Doorbell rings, open the door. I don't remember seeing who was standing on the doorstep. All I remember seeing is the station commander's car with the flag on it. That's never good news. And it was only really then that I noticed that Maggie was standing there and the station commander with his hat on. Another bad sign. Maggie just sort of said, Helen, it's okay, don't worry. We just need to tell you that John's plane didn't come back. He was on one of the sorties last night and his plane's missing. The best way I can describe it is a bit like having an out-of-body experience, that you're sort of looking down on all this stuff that's going on around you, but you don't really feel as if you're part of it.
They started smashing your head against the side of the lorry, hitting your head with pistol butts, and then you entered in the city and it's a maelstrom of noise. You've got people going into the city, people going out of the city, Kalashnikov machine guns, and he's manically firing those in the sky. Big anti-aircraft guns, they're the most screaming, shouting, rasping sound. The van comes to a halt. They push you out the van and it feels like you go through this corridor of troopers, kicking, rifle bashing and thumping you, and they push you in a room. Within 2 seconds of getting in a room, suddenly you hear a and a bomb hits the room. The whole of the ceiling, it collapses, the two walls get blown up, we get picked up, get thrown 4 meters and end up under a pile of desks, rubble. A number of men come in and my world goes black. The next thing, I find myself in a room. I'm blindfolded, bag on my head, handcuffed, and you can smell and sense there's 6, 7, 8 men in the room. You can smell their sweat. You can smell the smoke from their cigarettes. You can smell violence and death. And the first thing they say, name, Peters, rank, flight 10, and then they say, are you pilot or navigator? And I meant to say, I cannot answer that question, sir. I say, I cannot, I don't even get that out. Suddenly, you don't see it coming. I've got a baseball bat round my head, and they don't ask me a question for 40, 50 minutes. Your body's like a rag doll. I've got 2 crushed vertebrae from the ejection. 6, 7, 8 men just smash your body with baseball bats and rubber truncheons. They set your hair on fire, they burn you with cigarettes, they threaten you with gang rape, threaten to cut you off, threaten to gun guns and knives up your arse, lots of mock executions. And you kept in solitary confinement, no sleep, pull you up, ask you another question, I cannot, and that just carries on for minutes, for hours, for days. It's intense.
In the first few days after you've been captured, you might go through a bit of denial, not wanting to believe it's happening. You might, have lots of hope that gets dashed. We sort of expect that they're going to try and mess with our heads because they want to essentially break down our will to live so that we, give them absolutely everything that they want. But also, you're adjusting to, a pretty horrific situation that no amount of training is really ever going to prepare you for.
If you want to understand a man's character, give him power. Look at our political elites across the world at the moment. When you sit in the corridor, they come along and they beat the crap out of you, 4 or 5 guys. They kicked me to the floor. One guy stood on my head, another guy stood on my ankle, another guy sat on my thighs, and another guy sat on my chest. blood is gushing out my nose. I can feel the blood in my teeth, and I'm choking on my own blood. But the worst part, I couldn't breathe. Because my arms are all distended behind my back. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I'm being suffocated, and then they unzip your flying suit, they pull your penis out, and suddenly you go, they're gonna cut my penis, and I'm quite like this, they're gonna cut off the, and then you realise there's no pain. And then they get up and walk away. You sit up and you look down under your hood, and they've drawn around my penis with a red felt tip pen. They're checking whether I'm Jewish or not. I have so many stories. I can remember that. You don't want that. The most intense phase was the first week. And then after that, you had sporadic beatings, and we were kept in solitary confinement, and then systematically starved to death, really. They don't really feed you. The food for the day is a cup of water, a piece of pita bread, and we had a small bowl which they filled with a gruel-type soup once a day that they just put through a gap in the door. Throughout my time, they try and isolate you. So I didn't know John was alive or dead. We were bombed lots of times, and on each occasion I shouted down, I went, "Is John Nichol there?" Because the Iraqis left, they went into bomb shelters when the bombing started. "Is John Nichol?" He said, "Yeah, I'm sitting here with a plastic bowl on my head." I said, "I bet you're not a fat now, are you?"
You know, I was going through the motions of feeding my daughter, breastfeeding my daughter, going through the motions of trying to potty train my son. But at the same time, there was all this other stuff going on, a bit of a surreal experience. And even then, there was very little information coming through. I just thought I would feel different if John was dead. And I didn't feel that he was dead. And I can't explain that. Somehow I felt that I would know if he was dead. And therefore, until it was proven to me, I was going to work on the assumption that he could potentially still be alive.
I'd spent 4 or 5 days in interrogation. You're in a bad place in many respects. And I was sat in a corridor, and they're playing white noise, which is like a crackly radio. It's basically sensory deprivation. You've got a bag on your head, and you're blindfolded. And they kicked me awake. They took the black bag off your head. They then took metal handcuffs off, and instantly your arms sort of jolt out in front of you, because if you've had metal handcuffs on for 5 days, people don't think about this, they're behind your back, so every time you fall to the floor, you don't stop yourself, and it hurts. And the ratchet on the handcuffs tightens every time you fall and cuts into your wrists. And I looked at my forearms, and they were all swollen up like Popeye. You had these huge balloons on your forearms. You had this big inch-wide bangle of lardy-type flesh, completely flat on one side next to a black, red, and a blue cut. And they beat you up a bit, and you're still doing this. Your arms are shaking because you can't stop them. And then they get a gun out. They put the gun against your head. They pull the hammer back, and they say, "You're going on television, or you will never see your wife and children again."
You have to remember that in all of this situation, I'm actually in Germany. I haven't got my parents down the road. I haven't got John's parents down the road. I have to say the RAF community at RAF Larbrook were fantastic, led really by the station commander. He came and briefed me every day, kept me updated. He was briefing the station every day.
There's a camera right in front of your face. They had a microphone, and they had a script, and the script was very much, you know, I disagree with this war, and it's a wrong war, and I don't think we should be here. When you are a prisoner of war, your captors tell you nothing. It's called dislocation of expectations. They want to maintain a level of anxiety. It is really obvious when they're putting a camera in front of your face that they're going to use it for propaganda purposes. And I knew my face was puffy, and I knew I had a cut on my face, and I thought, I'll play Punch Drunk. So actually what you see on television is acting. I'll just put my face down, and I'll play that game as if I couldn't speak. And then this Iraqi major who was standing just beside me, great big bloke, moustache and unshaven, pulled me up and stuck a gun in my eyeball, and he said, "I will shoot your balls off. You damn well do this." My proudest part about being the prison war, I think I was the only one who didn't do the script.
I got a phone call early on the Thursday morning to say, "Helen, we've just been advised the Iraqis have released some video of some POWs, and it's going to be on the news."
I basically thought, this is the last time my family will see me alive. And once I've done this, they're going to shoot me. And I thought my children's sole impression of their father, and the father they would never know because Guy was 2 years old and my daughter Tony was 6 weeks old when I went to war, was that I was a weak traitor. I mean, there was a gun just off screen, right against my head. What would you do?
So when we go through our training, we are trained to expect that we might end up being put on camera. Presumably, the enemy will do that as a sort of show of power. It's a political statement. It sends a very, very strong signal. And I think, it's designed to humiliate you as a prisoner. And I remember, John saying that he felt like a traitor and a failure. So it's designed to be absolutely humiliating for the captor. And again, all of this is designed to kind of break down your will to survive, I suppose.
Before the 6 o'clock tea time news, I got another telephone call from the station to say, "Okay, Helen, he's on. You will be seeing John." He, of course, he looked a bit the worse for wear, but I wasn't really seeing that because all I was thinking is he's alive.
After I'd been put on television, they pulled us out and they moved us into the back of a van. My knee was against someone else, and I don't know why you have that. Even though you're bagged and handcuffed, you saw that wasn't a guard. And I pushed my knee out, and the knee pushed back. And again, that gave real strength, because that was another prisoner. I eventually found out that was Mauricio, the Italian navigator. They drove us away, and they stopped, and they pushed both Mauricio and I out of the van. We were the only two. After TV, they just put a bag on my head and I could see through. It looked like a South American prison, and there were bullet holes all over the wall, and it had a putrid smell of water. It smelt of death. We were transported to a military prison.
I have to keep reminding people, well, wait a minute, we know they were alive in that few minutes that footage was taken. We don't exactly know when that was, and we're now a month later. One assumed, and it proved correct, that they were in either a military base or in a prison. There's a very strong possibility that they're under a pile of rubble as the result of a bombing raid from the Allied forces.
In the military prison, they weren't like the interrogators. They were tough, but not abusive. And I'm put in a cell. My back was extremely painful. I've got 5th and 6th crushed vertebrae, and my eye was really quite bad. They did give me some eye drops. When I was being taken along to the cell to go to the toilet one day, I saw a pen, a biro, on the windowsill, and I fell against the wall and managed to get the biro. And so that's when I started making a diary, and I wanted to monitor my psychological resilience, I suppose, to make sure that if I started going down into a spiral, that I could use my tenacity to make sure I was aware of that and prevent that. I did the dates, because time is everything in captivity, and I crossed the dates off each day. And in the cross, if I felt good that day, I filled in the top part of the cross. If I felt average, I filled in the two sides, and if I felt bad, I filled in the bottom.
So we're trained to have some coping mechanisms when we are in captivity because you don't know how long it's going to be. You know, for John Peters, he was talking about kind of logging his mood, and I suspect that that is so that he can retain a bit of structure and so sort of stay mentally sharp. Again, it comes back to these little things that you can do within your circle of influence. So there's so much that you don't control when you're in captivity, but you can control your attitude and you can, you know, celebrate the small wins. So it's all about finding those areas where you can stay mentally sharp and stay in control as much as you can.
One day the bombing stopped. And sound is everything in captivity. You can't help but emotionally start to hope. My view is you've got to keep hope at arm's length because then it drives you. You're never going to quite reach hope. If you bring that into you, it makes you soft and weak. So use hope as a driver, but don't bring it itself, because then you'd succumb to the depravity of the circumstance in which you are.
So the way that we're trained for resistance to interrogation in particular has changed after John Peters was shot down, because they realised that every single pilot or navigator that was taken prisoner by the Iraqis, they all talked. So the training wasn't fit for purpose, and they had to kind of think on their feet, really, under incredible amounts of pressure. Really, what emerged from that was this controlled release of information and trying to stay kind of in the green, i.e. only sharing open source information.
I gave myself 1 week to hope, and then I was going to cut it, saying, you don't hope anymore, just move forward. And then the following day, there's a knock on the door. And there was a guy, one of the interrogators there, who was wearing a light grey suit. He, because it was obviously a full moment, he did his button up, put his suit down and went, "Good morning, Flight 10 Peters. I'd just like to tell you the war is over. If there's anything my staff can do for you, please ask. Are you cold? Yes. And you got someone to throw some blankets in because I was just sleeping on the floor. Are you hungry? Gave some food. And he said, now, if you'd like to go to the toilet, just knock on the door and my staff will take you along to the toilet." And then they showered us, which was a bucket overhead, shaved us, changed the prisoner of war suit because it was covered in blood and crap and everything. And they took us out to a quadrangle, and it was outside in the sun, and it was warm. I mean, captivity was really cold. And they gave us tomatoes with salt, and you're sitting there eating tomatoes, and there was an Iraqi major who came around with a clipboard. And he went, "Oh, well, hello, don't worry, you're going to go home soon. I'm really sorry the coach is late. Do you know the war's done havoc with the roads?" And then he went, "Oh, you're Royal Air Force." "Oh, I love the Royal Air Force," he said, "and I love Britain. It's just a brilliant country. And Oxford, what a beautiful city," he said. "Have you been to the inn at the head of the river? It's a brilliant pub. I'd absolutely recommend you go there. You're going, this is just weird."
If and when you're released from captivity, I'm sure there'll be a whole range of emotions. It must be incredibly disorientating. I'm sure that you'll feel euphoria, relief, but also, you know, they talk about survivor's guilt. So depending on, you know, maybe not everyone has made it out. So you might feel a sense of guilt. And I suspect, you know, there will be trepidation, shame. You know, I remember John talked about, you know, worrying how he would be received. Would he be seen as a traitor? So I think it's probably very hard to predict how you're going to feel. It can probably take quite a lot of time for thoughts and emotions to materialize. I mean, on average, it can take up to 10 years for PTSD symptoms to kind of show themselves. So I think it's going to be a long journey that, you know, you need to go on to process what you've been through.
They put us in a coach. Interestingly, the coach had to keep our head on the thing on the front, and they kept on tapping us on the head with pistols. And I thought we were going to get wasted. But then the coach came to a halt. It was rocking, and it was the world's press trying to get photographs. So we were taken to the Baghdad Novotel. As we got into reception, and this young woman went, oh, welcome home. Well, you're going to go home soon, don't worry. And she almost stopped in her tracks and went, "Oh, you look a bit thin. What would you like to eat?" And there were men and women, American and Brits. We hadn't talked to each other the whole time. Everyone had experienced the same isolation and humiliation and beatings. And in chorus, we went, "Chocolate." a young man said we're in a hotel, and he ran round the 120 rooms with all those little chocolates that are on pillows. And that's how we got released. We were given chocolate in little parcels. To get back home, we were then transported through Baghdad. It was pitch black by then, and we were handed over to the British and American ambassador.
I got a telephone call early in the morning, and it was a friend saying, Helen, I've just seen John get off a plane in Jordan. I can remember I was probably really quite rude to Brian, because I just said, Brian, I've not heard anything. I don't want to know. I'm not looking at anything until I get any official information. Funny enough, John's brother was actually staying again, and Mark had heard this conversation. So he said, look, Helen, I'm going to go straight to the intelligence area at RAF Larbrook. Mark came back probably about 20 minutes, 25 minutes later. And I said, well, OK, what can you say? And he said, well, I'm not going to say anything. So he put this cassette in. Indeed, there was John getting off a plane in his yellow suit. And Guy immediately stood up, ran towards the telly and went, Daddy, Daddy.
I was flown onwards to the hospital in Cyprus, and an old university friend who was on my formation, Chris Lunt, was there, and I wasn't expecting him. I saw him, I went, and I burst out into tears, hugged him. Classic, so British, kind of,
you know, God, emotion. What do we do with this, you know, classic?
I mean, the hospital was empty, and you know how you get that flat, fluorescent light that just takes the colour and the context out of any building. Well, you're in this long corridor, and this lovely, as all nurses are, wonderfully warm and jovial nurse. Hello, welcome, Ham. She had a little clipboard, said, well, don't worry, we'll get you cleaned up, and, you know, I'm sure you're pleased to be out, yes. Would you like to phone home? You go, yeah, of course. She said, OK, well, there's a telephone box just down the corridor. Would you like to go? Yes, please, thank you. And we got to the phone. She said, well, you'll need a phone card. Here, I have a phone card. Oh, thank you very much. Can you sign for it? Yes, so I signed it. And I went, being British, could I have two? And she went, literally, empty corridor, no one. She said, OK, but don't tell anybody.
By later that day, we all started celebrating, and everybody just came piling round to the house with bottles of fizz, and the telephone rang. One of the other lads from the squadron went and answered, came back in and said, oh, it's John. So I said, John who? And he said, well, John, you know, John. He's in Cyprus. He's on the phone. So I trundled off to the phone, and it was indeed John. Suddenly talking to John on the phone just seemed bizarre. And what do you talk about? Almost there's so much to talk about, and equally, what do you talk about? And for some reason, the first thing that came into my head was, well, have you still got your balls then? What?
The Bedouins said, if ever we catch an Air Force pilot, we'll cut their balls off and sew them up into their
John
mouth.
Nichol also made it very clear he didn't particularly want them to get each other's in the wrong mouth.
Raw.
It had been a silly conversation in a pub. But for some reason, this came back to me, and I thought, depending on the way he answers this question, I will know whether he's all right or not. And he immediately started sort of laughing and said, yeah, they're all still here, they're fine, and I haven't got John's. He's still the John, I think, that he was when he went away. Then the celebration really took off.
I'm not a big bloke, but you know you're thin when you have no flesh in your fingers here. You just have your wrists, and you have huge, long fingers. And I didn't want to shock Helen how thin I was with my ribs. So, although you're in Cyprus, I got a big jumper. And we flew back. The Air Force had asked whether I minded the press being there. I didn't realise what that meant. There was a huge bank, huge, hundreds of bloody press. And they made sure we met Helen and the children outside of the public eye. I suppose my whole concern, I thought Guy was going to forget me, but the moment he saw me, he ran along the path saying, Daddy. And then I went back literally straight into a party because all the wives were there. They were all drunk. And you just fall back into the wonderful lifestyle that was, which is social, fun, and enjoyable. The joy of life lasts for about 2 weeks, I suppose. You do smell the air and feel the grass in your feet, and you go to a supermarket, you go, wow, because there's food there. I put 2.5 stone on in 2 weeks. Then the whole squadron came back and we went on leave for a month as a squadron, and then you just return to flying training. All my friends did amazing things. Many of them got gallantry medals. They just went back to normal. Friends died. Obscene numbers of Iraqi people died.
Whenever I hear a story about the missing person, they just don't know what's happened, I think that must be the most awful situation. I think that potentially is worse than finding out that your loved one has been killed, because you just don't get closure and you're constantly wondering, are they going to walk back in the door?
Everyone wants a piece of you. That's why I say black box to white light. It's the same thing. You have to hold on to who you are. You mustn't believe that level of tension, because I have no more attributes than anybody. I'm not that big, I'm not that strong. And everyone's telling you this constantly. It's overwhelmingly. You just like captivity, you hold on. It is what it is. You mustn't let it define you.
So one of the things I really like about what John talks about is he talks about post-traumatic growth. And that's not to minimise or try to diminish, the experience that people have been through who have got PTSD. But it makes a really eloquent point around the fact that you can grow from these things. You sort of are forced to do a bit of inner work. For example, when I went through some tough times when I was in the military, that helped me to discover mindfulness. So you probably can come out of these things stronger, but I don't think it's going to be an easy process. And I think professional help is, going to help.
I'm a terrible worrier, and I'm always awake in the middle of the night, fretting about the most ridiculously stupid things and writing lists in case I forget this and I forget that and I forget the other. And sometimes I actually have to take myself back to say, look, why are you worrying yourself about these silly little things when you almost slept better when there was a major trauma going on? John is actually a much more confident person than he was before he went away, because I think he realised that he could cope with things that he hadn't realised.
I'm very lucky. Helen's a very strong character, and I knew in captivity Helen would be fine, and therefore that gave me strength.
Officer Cadet Guy Peters, receiving the Queen's Medal for Excellence at the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst. It's an equally proud moment for his father, John Peters, an RAF Tornado pilot shot down during the first Gulf.
I'm probably a bit more emotional now. We've all heard of PTSD. I'm very much post-traumatic growth. And most people say, what's that? Well, PTSD is a great story, but actually a tiny percentage of people suffer from PTSD, and we should support them. Nietzsche, that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger. You grow after a traumatic event, and that's me.